The desert sun blazed mercilessly over Painted Rock, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878, casting long shadows across the dusty main street where 18-year-old Clara Kingston collapsed to her knees, her parched lips cracking as she gazed up at the sheriff's office door. "Please, sir," she rasped, clutching the bundle of rags in her arms tighter to her chest. "My baby sister needs milk. We haven't eaten in 2 days." Sheriff Wilkes stood on the boardwalk, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, his weathered face creasing into a mocking smile beneath his thick mustache. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt near Clara's skirts. "Ain't my problem, girl. Shoulda thought about feedin' a baby before your pa got himself killed." He laughed, the sound harsh in the dry air. "Got me a town to protect, not orphans to coddle." A small crowd had gathered, most looking away in discomfort or muttering among themselves. None stepped forward. Clara's vision blurred with tears as she tried to stand, her legs weak from hunger and the 50-mile journey from their failed homestead. "Sheriff's right," one onlooker called out. "Send her to the mission down in Tucson." The bundle in Clara's arms stirred, and a feeble cry emerged. Little Bethany, barely 6 months old, had cried herself hoarse over the past day. "Look at that," the sheriff scoffed. "Can't even keep the brat quiet." Clara didn't see the tall figure approaching from the livery until his shadow fell across her. The crowd parted as a man dismounted from a dappled gray stallion, spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. His face was partially hidden by the brim of his hat, but his shoulders were broad beneath a dust-covered duster. "That's enough, Wilkes." The man's voice was quiet but carried an edge that silenced the sheriff's laughter. "Stay out of this, Nash," Sheriff Wilkes warned, his hand moving instinctively toward his holster. The man called Nash knelt beside Clara, and she caught sight of clear blue eyes in a sun-bronzed face. "You and your sister all right, miss?" Clara clutched Bethany tighter. "She needs milk. Our mother died in childbirth. Father last week. The drought took our cattle. I've walked since yesterday." Without another word, the cowboy scooped Clara up with surprising gentleness, baby and all, and placed her on his horse. The crowd murmured as he gathered the reins. "Where are you taking her, Nash?" the sheriff demanded. "Home," was all the cowboy said, swinging up behind Clara and turning his horse toward the outskirts of town. Clara leaned back against the solid warmth of his chest, too exhausted to protest. The last thing she remembered before unconsciousness claimed her was the man's voice, low in her ear. "I'm Rowan Nash. You're safe now." The Nash Ranch spread across a small valley 8 miles outside Painted Rock. As Rowan guided his horse down the winding path toward the modest but well-maintained house, he felt the young woman in his arms stir. "Where are we?" Clara mumbled, clutching her sister who had fallen into an uneasy sleep. "My place," Rowan answered. "Not much, but we've got fresh milk from my dairy cows. That little one will be fed soon." As they approached the ranch house, a middle-aged woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a bun. "Rowan, who have you brought?" she called, hurrying down the steps. "Found them in town, Mrs. Abernathy," Rowan explained as he carefully dismounted, helping Clara down. "The baby needs milk, and they both need tending." Mrs. Abernathy, Rowan's housekeeper since his parents' passing 5 years prior, immediately took charge, ushering Clara into the house while giving rapid-fire instructions. "Bring the fresh milk from the spring house, Rowan, and have Miguel prepare a room. The poor dears look half dead." Within the hour, little Bethany was drinking eagerly from a bottle Mrs. Abernathy had fashioned, while Clara, having eaten a bowl of hearty stew, sat at the kitchen table watching her sister with tears of relief in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, looking up at Rowan who stood awkwardly by the doorway, hat in hand. He shifted his weight. No need for thanks. Couldn't let Wilkes treat you that way. Clara studied him properly for the first time. Rowan Nash was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25, with a strong jaw and those striking blue eyes that seemed almost out of place in his sun-darkened face. There was a quietness about him that spoke of someone comfortable with solitude. "Why did you help us when no one else would?" she asked. Rowan looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. "For years ago, I rode into a town much like Painted Rock. Was injured, bleeding. Sheriff there laughed and told me to ride on. Said he didn't need another drifter causing trouble." He paused. "Nearly died that night. Promised myself I'd never turn away someone in need." Mrs. Abernathy bustled back into the kitchen. "The room's ready. You both need rest." "I couldn't impose," Clara began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. "You'll stay until you're properly recovered. Then we can discuss what comes next." That night, lying in a clean bed with Bethany sleeping peacefully beside her, Clara stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to weep not from despair, but from the overwhelming relief of finding kindness in a world that had shown her so little. 3 days passed, and Clara regained her strength. Each morning, she woke to find fresh milk for Bethany and breakfast for herself. Rowan was often gone by sunrise, tending to his cattle and the small but prosperous ranch operations. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite but reserved. On the 4th morning, Clara found him on the porch at dawn, drinking coffee as he watched the sun rise over the distant mountains. "May I join you?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded, pouring her a cup from the pot beside him. They sat in companionable silence until Clara spoke. "I need to find work, for Bethany's sake." Rowan glanced at her. "The ranch is doing well. You could stay on here. Mrs. Abernathy could use the help, and there's plenty of milk for your sister." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. "I can't accept charity forever. It wouldn't be charity. We need an extra pair of hands, especially with Mrs. Abernathy getting older." His voice was matter of fact, but there was a gentleness to it. "Besides, where would you go?" It was a question Clara had been avoiding. She had no family, no friends in the territory. The homestead her father had struggled to build was now abandoned, too far from water to sustain life. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I need to make my own way." Rowan seemed to consider this. "The town has a small school. Previous teacher left last spring. You read and write well. I've seen your father's Bible you brought with you." Clara looked at him in surprise. "I've never taught before. Town's desperate. Kids running wild. Sheriff's wife was filling in, but she's expecting. If you're interested, I could speak to the town council." Hope flickered in Clara's chest for the first time in months. "You'd do that?" Rowan shrugged. "Painted Rock needs a teacher. You need work. Makes sense." The simplicity of his logic made Clara smile. "Thank you. Truly." Something changed in Rowan's expression when she smiled, a softening around his eyes, quickly masked as he looked back toward the horizon. "No promises. Town council can be stubborn. Still, it's more than anyone has offered in a long time." As they finished their coffee, Clara found herself studying Rowan's profile against the morning light. There was something about him that spoke of both strength and solitude, as if he had built walls around himself that few were allowed to breach. "Why did you really help us that day?" she asked suddenly. Rowan was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Finally, he set his cup down. "You reminded me of someone," he said simply, and rose to his feet. "Got work to do. Rest today. I'll ride into town tomorrow about the teaching position." Before she could ask more, he was gone, striding toward the barn where his ranch hands were already preparing for the day's work. The town council meeting was held in the back room of Painted Rock's only hotel, a dusty establishment called the Silver Spur. Clara sat nervously as 5 men, including Sheriff Wilkes, debated her fate. "She's got no teaching experience," Wilkes argued, shooting Clara a suspicious glance. "Neither does your wife," countered Howard Jenkins, the town's only lawyer and head of the council. "And Mrs. Kingston here has a proper education from back east, according to her father's papers. She was begging in the street a week ago," Wilkes persisted. Rowan, who had been leaning against the wall near the door, straightened. "She was asking for help for her infant sister after burying her father and walking 50 miles. "Hardly begging, Wilkes." The sheriff's face reddened. "You've got no say here, Nash. You don't even live in town." "My taxes pay your salary," Rowan replied evenly. "And I supply most of your beef. I'd say that gives me a voice." Jenkins cleared his throat. "The fact remains we need a teacher. The children have been without proper schooling for months." Clara gathered her courage and stood. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns. I may not have formal teaching experience, but I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut before my family moved west. I can teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and basic sciences. All I ask is a chance to prove myself." The room fell silent as the council members exchanged glances. 3 months, Jenkins finally declared. "We'll give you 3 months as a trial. Salary is $30 a month, plus room and board at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house." Clara's heart leapt. It wasn't much, but it would feed and house her and Bethany. "What about the baby?" Sheriff Wilkes demanded. "Can't have a crying infant disrupting lessons. Bethany can stay with Mrs. Abernathy during school hours," Rowan said before Clara could respond. "I'll bring Clara to town each morning and take her home afterward." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Awful accommodating, Nash. Got a special interest in this girl." A muscle twitched in Rowan's jaw, but his voice remained calm. "Just being neighborly, Wilkes. Something you might try sometime." Jenkins banged his gavel before the tension could escalate. "It's settled then. Miss Kingston starts Monday. School runs from 8 to 3, 5 days a week." As they left the hotel, Clara almost stumbled with relief. Rowan caught her elbow to steady her. "Thank you," she whispered, tears threatening. "You earned it yourself," he replied. "That was brave, standing up to them like that." "I was terrified," she confessed. The corner of Rowan's mouth lifted in a rare half-smile. "Couldn't tell. You've got grit, Clara Kingston." The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Will it really be all right? Bringing me to town every day?" "It's on my way," he said simply, though they both knew it wasn't. "Come on. Mrs. Abernathy will want to hear the news." As they rode back to the ranch, Clara found herself watching Rowan's hands on the reins, strong, capable hands that had lifted her and Bethany from despair just days ago. There was something comforting about his quiet presence, so different from the boisterous men she'd known in town. For the first time since her father's death, Clara felt a flicker of something beyond mere survival. It was too soon to name it hope, but it was a beginning. By the end of her first month of teaching, Clara had fallen into a routine. Each morning, Rowan would arrive at the schoolhouse with her, little Bethany bundled in a sling across Clara's chest. Mrs. Abernathy would take the baby for the day, and Clara would face her 12 students, ranging in age from 6 to 15. The work was challenging but rewarding. Most of the children were eager to learn, though a few of the older boys initially tested her authority. Clara discovered she had a natural talent for teaching, finding creative ways to engage even the most reluctant students. On this particular Friday afternoon, as she dismissed the class, she noticed Rowan waiting outside earlier than usual, speaking with Howard Jenkins. The lawyer nodded gravely before walking away. When Clara approached, Rowan's expression was troubled. "Is everything all right?" she asked, gathering her books. "Fine," he said, but his tone belied the word. "Ready to collect Bethany?" They walked in silence to Mrs. Abernathy's sister's house where the baby spent her days. After retrieving a happily gurgling Bethany, they started the ride home. "The council is pleased with your teaching," Rowan finally said as they left town behind. Jenkins said the parents have nothing but praise. Clara smiled, bouncing Bethany gently on her lap. "The children are wonderful. Even Tommy Wilson is starting to participate, and he wouldn't even look at me the first week." Rowan nodded, but his mind seemed elsewhere. "Something's bothering you," Clara observed. "Is it what Mr. Jenkins told you?" Rowan sighed. "Railroads coming through. Survey crew was in town yesterday." Clara frowned. "Isn't that good news?" "It would bring more business to Painted Rock. For some," Rowan acknowledged. "For others, it means trouble. The proposed route cuts right through the eastern section of my ranch. And the Apache reservation. Can they do that? Just take your land." "They'll offer compensation," Rowan said bitterly. "Never what it's worth, though. And for the Apache, it's worse. Government's already looking for excuses to reduce their territory." Clara saw the genuine concern in his eyes. Over the past month, she'd learned that Rowan maintained unusually respectful relations with the local Apache band. He traded fairly with them and had even learned some of their language during his 10 years in the territory. "What will you do?" she asked. "Fight it, I suppose. Jenkins has agreed to represent me." He glanced at her. "It doesn't affect your position, if that's what you're worried about." "I wasn't," Clara said honestly. "I was thinking of you." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, surprise, perhaps, that she would concern herself with his problems. The moment hung between them until Bethany cooed, breaking the tension. "She's getting bigger," Rowan observed, his voice softening as he looked at the baby. "Strong, like her sister." Clara felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "She's thriving thanks to you and Mrs. Abernathy." "You'd have found a way," Rowan said with quiet certainty. "You're resourceful." That evening, after Bethany was asleep, Clara found herself sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the vast, star-filled sky. The ranch had begun to feel like home in a way she hadn't expected. Mrs. Abernathy treated her like a daughter. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully when they saw her, and even Miguel's wife had taken to teaching Clara Spanish phrases in the kitchen. And then there was Rowan, so reserved, yet always present when needed. She'd noticed how he checked the locks each night, how he'd built a special cradle for Bethany, how he always made sure Clara had the books she requested for her lessons. The door opened behind her, and Rowan stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Clara and settled beside her on the steps, a respectable distance between them. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Just thinking," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "About how much has changed in a month." Rowan nodded, looking out at the darkness. "For the better, I hope." "Very much so." Clara hesitated, then added, "When I first came to your ranch, I was so focused on survival I couldn't see beyond the next day. Now I'm making plans, thinking about next term's lessons, watching Bethany grow." "You've built something here," Rowan said. "The children respect you." "Town too." "I've been lucky," Clara murmured. Rowan shook his head. "Not luck. Determination. Courage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their coffee. "May I ask you something personal?" Clara finally ventured. Rowan tensed slightly but nodded. "You mentioned I reminded you of someone. Who was it?" The silence stretched so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost a whisper. My sister, Rebecca. She was 17 when we came west with our parents. There was an outbreak of fever in the mining town where we settled. Took her and our mother within a week of each other. I'm so sorry, Clara said softly. Was a long time ago. 10 years this October. Rowan stared into his cup. She was bright like you, had her heart set on teaching. Clara's own heart ached for the loss she heard in his voice. That's why you helped us. Partly, he admitted. But it was more than that. The way you stood there, protecting your sister despite everything. He trailed off, then added quietly, most would have given up. I nearly did, Clara confessed. Before you came along. Rowan's eyes met hers in the darkness. I'm glad I was there. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the bond that had formed in the midst of crisis. Clara found herself wanting to reach out, to bridge the small distance between them on the step, but she held back, uncertain. The moment was broken by a cry from inside the house, Bethany waking for her nighttime feeding. I should go to her, Clara said, rising. Rowan stood as well, taking her coffee cup. Get some rest. I heard the Wilsons talking about bringing their older boy to school on Monday. The one who's been working their farm. Clara smiled. That would be wonderful. Good night, Rowan. Good night, Clara. As she tended to Bethany in the soft lamplight, Clara found herself replaying their conversation. For the first time, Rowan had shared something deeply personal, had let her glimpse the pain he carried. Felt like a gift, one she would treasure carefully. The railroad dispute dominated town gossip through the summer months. Clara, now officially confirmed as Painted Rock schoolteacher after her successful trial period, heard snippets of conversation as parents dropped off their children. Nash is fighting a losing battle, she overheard Mr. Wilson telling the blacksmith one morning. Railroads got the government backing them. Shame, though, the blacksmith replied. That eastern pasture of his is the best grazing land in the county. Clara tried not to worry, but she noticed the strain on Rowan's face as the weeks passed. He spent long days meeting with Jenkins, writing letters to territorial officials, and once even traveling all the way to Phoenix to speak with the governor's office. One evening in late August, when the heat lay heavy over the land even as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Clara found Rowan in the barn, methodically brushing down his horse after a day in town. Any news? She asked, leaning against the stall door. Rowan shook his head. Nothing good. Railroads offering less than half what the land's worth. Clara watched him work, noting the tension in his shoulders. Mr. Jenkins can't help? He's trying. But the territorial judge is in the railroad's pocket. Rowan sighed, setting down the brush. Chief Black Horse came to see me yesterday. Said his people are preparing for trouble. You think it will come to that? Rowan met her eyes. I hope not. But when men with power want something, they rarely let right and wrong stand in their way. Clara had never heard such bitterness in his voice before. She stepped into the stall, close enough to smell the leather of his vest and the clean sweat from a day's work. You've built something beautiful here, she said softly. I understand why you want to protect it. Rowan's expression softened as he looked at her. It's not just the land. It's what it represents. Freedom. Independence. A fair chance. The things America is supposed to stand for, Clara murmured. Exactly. He hesitated, then added, My father came west because he believed a man could build something with his own hands, answer to no one but himself and God. When he died, I promised I'd keep that dream alive. Clara impulsively reached out, touching his arm. You haven't failed him, Rowan. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. Something shifted in his eyes, a warming, a recognition. For a breathless moment, Clara thought he might step closer. Instead, He gently covered her hand with his own. "Thank you for understanding." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with unspoken feelings. Then, from the house, Mrs. Abernathy's voice called out that supper was ready. Rowan stepped back, the connection broken. "We should go in." Clara nodded, following him out of the barn. But as they walked toward the house, side by side in the gathering twilight, she felt something had changed between them, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. September brought cooler temperatures and an unexpected visitor to the schoolhouse. Clara was teaching the younger children their letters when the door opened, revealing a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit, accompanied by Sheriff Wilkes. "Miss Kingston," the sheriff said with forced politeness. "This is Mr. Harrington from the Western Pacific Railroad Company." Clara straightened, immediately wary. "Children, please continue practicing your letters. I'll be just a moment." She stepped outside with the men, closing the door behind her. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" she asked, keeping her tone professional. Mr. Harrington smiled, revealing perfect teeth beneath a neatly trimmed mustache. "Miss Kingston, I understand you're residing at the Nash Ranch." "I am," she confirmed cautiously. "Excellent. Perhaps you could deliver a message to Mr. Nash." He withdrew an envelope from his coat pocket. "A final offer for his eastern pastureland. 30% higher than our previous proposal." Clara did not take the envelope. "Mr. Nash comes to town regularly. I'm sure you could deliver it yourself." Harrington's smile tightened. "Mr. Nash has been difficult to reach lately." "He's avoiding these vultures," Wilkes muttered, earning a sharp glance from the railroad man. "I'm not comfortable involving myself in Mr. Nash's business affairs," Clara said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have students waiting." "Of course," Harrington said smoothly, returning the envelope to his pocket. "Just one more thing. I understand your position here is still somewhat provisional. It would be a shame if the town council felt the need to reconsider their appointment." Clara felt a cold anger rise within her. "Are you threatening my livelihood, Mr. Harrington?" "Not at all," he replied. "Merely observing that a growing town like Painted Rock will need teachers who understand progress and cooperation." "I understand ethics quite well, sir," Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I teach my students that intimidation is the tactic of those who lack moral standing. Good day, gentlemen." She turned and re-entered the schoolhouse, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she watched the men walk away, Harrington gesturing emphatically while Wilkes nodded. That afternoon, when Rowan arrived to collect her, Clara told him about the encounter. "They threatened your position?" Rowan's face darkened with anger as they rode toward the ranch. "Not directly enough to call it such," Clara replied. But the implication was clear. Rowan's hands tightened on the reins. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this. I'm already involved, Rowan. I live on your land, care for your stock when needed, eat at your table." She paused. "Your fight is my fight." He looked at her then, really looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No. I won't have you risking your future for my sake." "It's my choice," Clara insisted. "Besides, what they're doing is wrong. Someone needs to stand against it." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "You're extraordinary, Clara Kingston. Do you know that?" The unexpected compliment made her cheeks warm. "Hardly. I'm just doing what's right." "Most don't," he said simply. That evening, after dinner, Rowan asked Clara to join him in his study, a small room lined with bookshelves that she had rarely entered. Inside, he spread a map across his desk. "This is my ranch," he explained, tracing the boundaries with his finger. "The railroad wants this eastern section for their main line to Phoenix." Clara studied the map. "It's a significant portion of your land." About a quarter. My best grazing land. Rowan pointed to another area. This is the Apache Reservation. The railroad's proposed route cuts through their sacred burial grounds. That's terrible, Clara murmured. There's an alternative route, Rowan continued, indicating a different line drawn in pencil. It would skirt both my property and the reservation, but it would add 12 miles to the journey and require a tunnel through the western hills. More expensive, Clara surmised. Considerably, but the right thing to do. Rowan straightened, running a hand through his hair. Jenkins thinks we might have a chance if we can get the territorial governor to intervene. Clara noticed a stack of letters on the corner of the desk. Is that why you've been writing so many letters? Rowan nodded. Every official, newspaper editor, and influential citizen I can think of. So far, little response. What about the Apache? Have they joined your effort? Chief Black Horse has sent his own appeals, but Rowan's expression grew troubled. The government rarely listens to Indian concerns, especially when money is involved. Clara studied his face in the lamplight, the worry lines around his eyes, the determined set of his jaw. Over the months, she had come to admire not just his kindness but his principles, his unwavering sense of justice. There must be something more we can do, she said. Rowan looked at her, a smile touching his lips at her use of we. Jenkins suggests going public, getting a reporter from the territorial newspaper to write about it. Create enough outcry that the governor can't ignore it. That's an excellent idea, Clara said enthusiastically. I could help draft the appeal. Between my teaching and your ranching experience, we could make a compelling case. Rowan's smile widened. You never cease to amaze me. Most women would be running in the opposite direction from this trouble. I'm not most women, Clara replied, holding his gaze. No, Rowan agreed softly. You certainly are not. For a breathless moment, they stood close together over the map, the lamplight casting a golden glow around them. Clara was acutely aware of Rowan's presence, of the slight scent of pine soap and leather that always seemed to surround him. The moment was broken by Mrs. Abernathy calling that Bethany was asking for Clara. I should go to her, Clara said reluctantly. Rowan nodded. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. And Clara, thank you. As she left the study, Clara felt a growing certainty that her fate and Rowan's were becoming increasingly intertwined, and the thought filled her with both excitement and trepidation. The territorial newspaper published their story in early October. Clara had helped Rowan craft a passionate appeal emphasizing both the economic injustice to legitimate landowners and the cultural devastation to the Apache people. The reporter, impressed by their detailed proposal for an alternative route, wrote a front-page article that quickly gained attention throughout the territory. Letters of support began arriving at the ranch, and Howard Jenkins reported that the governor's office had requested a meeting. For the first time in months, Rowan seemed cautiously optimistic. We might actually win this, he told Clara one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. Bethany, now almost 10 months old, played on a blanket at their feet, grabbing at wooden blocks Rowan had carved for her. The baby had thrived in the months at the ranch, growing chubby and strong, her dark curls and bright eyes reminiscent of her sister's. I believe we will, Clara said, smiling as Bethany babbled happily. The truth is on our side. Rowan watched the baby attempt to stack 2 blocks. She's getting more coordinated every day. Mrs. Abernathy says she'll be walking before we know it. Clara looked down at her sister with pride. Father would be amazed to see how she's grown. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the months since Clara had arrived at the ranch, these quiet evenings had become precious to her, moments of peace shared with Rowan after busy days of teaching and ranching. The Harvest Festival is next weekend, Rowan said suddenly. Whole town comes out for dancing, food. Would you like to attend? With me. Clara looked up in surprise. Rowan had never specifically asked to escort her anywhere before. Their daily journeys to and from town had simply become routine. I would like that very much, she answered, her heart quickening. Rowan's smile was soft in the fading light. Good. That's good. Bethany chose that moment to topple her block tower with a delighted squeal, making them both laugh. As Rowan reached down to help the baby rebuild, Clara watched his large, capable hands gently guiding Bethany's smaller ones. The tenderness he showed the child never failed to move her. You're wonderful with her, Clara observed. Rowan glanced up, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. She makes it easy. Smart little thing. She adores you, Clara said softly. As do I. The words slipped out before she could consider them, hanging in the air between them. Rowan's hands stilled on the blocks, his eyes lifting to meet hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Clara. He began, his voice rough with emotion. The moment was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Rowan was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the pistol he kept at his hip when on the ranch. A rider appeared in the gathering dusk, one of Rowan's ranch hands, riding hard from the direction of town. Mr. Nash, the man called as he reined in his lathered horse. Trouble in town. Railroad men showed up with papers. Say they're starting survey work tomorrow on your east pasture. Rowan's expression hardened. They can't. The governor's office is still reviewing our appeal. They got some judge to sign off on it, the ranch hand explained breathlessly. Sheriff's backing them up. Jenkins sent me to warn you. Clara had risen to her feet, clutching Bethany protectively. What will you do? Rowan turned to her, his face grim. Get inside and lock the doors. I need to ride to the reservation, warned Chief Black Horse. You think there will be violence? Clara asked, fear tightening her chest. I hope not, Rowan said, already striding toward the barn. But if the railroad men start work on Apache burial grounds, I need to make sure Black Horse knows to keep his warriors calm until we can get the governor involved. Clara followed him, Bethany on her hip. Let me come with you. Rowan stopped, turning to her with surprise. It could be dangerous. Two voices are more persuasive than one, Clara argued. And I've met Chief Black Horse's wife at the trading post. She might listen to another woman. Rowan hesitated, clearly torn. Besides, Clara added, if there's trouble coming, I'd rather Bethany and I were with you than waiting at the ranch. Something in Rowan's expression shifted, a softening. A decision made. All right, get what you need for the baby. We leave in 10 minutes. The ride to the Apache encampment took nearly 2 hours, much of it in darkness lit only by the half-moon overhead. Rowan led the way confidently, Bethany secured in a sling across Clara's chest, sleeping despite the jolting journey. The Apache sentries challenged them at the perimeter, but when they recognized Rowan, they escorted the group immediately to Chief Black Horse's dwelling. The chief was a dignified man in his 50s. His face lined with experience but his eyes sharp and intelligent. His wife, Morning Water, welcomed Clara with quiet courtesy, offering to take the sleeping Bethany while they talked. For over an hour, Rowan and Black Horse conversed, sometimes in English, sometimes in the Apache language Rowan had learned. Clara contributed when asked, explaining how the newspaper article had gained support from communities throughout the territory. The railroad men do not care for words on paper, Black Horse finally said, his voice deep and measured. They understand only power and money. Violence will only give them an excuse to take more from your people, Rowan argued. If Apache warriors attack surveyors, the army will come. The chief nodded gravely. This I know, but we cannot allow them to desecrate our ancestors' resting place. What if we delay them? Clara suggested. Not through violence, but by making the work impossible? All eyes turned to her. The governor is reviewing our appeal, she continued. We just need time for him to act. If we can prevent the survey for a few days. Black Horse's eyes gleamed with interest. How would you suggest this, teacher woman? Clara thought quickly. A presence. Peaceful but unmovable. If both your people and ranch hands from the surrounding area simply occupied the land, sat on it day and night, the surveyors couldn't work. A protest? Rowan murmured, a slow smile spreading across his face. Not a fight, but a stand. My warriors would agree to this, Black Horse said thoughtfully. To sit rather than strike. It is unusual but honorable. I can speak to the other ranchers, Rowan added, growing animated. Many are concerned about the railroad's tactics, even if their own land isn't threatened yet. Morning Water, who had been silent until now, spoke in her soft, accented English. The women will come too. Bring children. Make food. Show the railroad men we are families, not savages. Clara nodded gratefully. Exactly. Make them see the human cost of their actions. By the time they left the encampment, a plan had been formed. The Apache would gather at dawn near their burial grounds, while Rowan would ride through the night to alert sympathetic ranchers. Clara would return to town in the morning to inform Jenkins and rally support from the townspeople. As they rode away, Bethany once again sleeping soundly against Clara, Rowan reached across to touch Clara's hand. That was inspired, he said quietly. I would have only thought of confrontation. Clara squeezed his fingers briefly. Sometimes the strongest stand is the most peaceful one. Rowan's eyes held hers in the moonlight. You've brought more than just teaching to Painted Rock, Clara Kingston. And you've given me more than just shelter, Rowan Nash. The night air was cool around them, the stars brilliant overhead, as they rode side by side toward whatever the morning would bring. Dawn broke over the eastern pasture of the Nash Ranch with a golden light that belied the tension in the air. By sunrise, over 50 Apache men, women, and children had gathered near their ancestral burial grounds, sitting quietly in family groups. They were joined by 24 ranch hands from neighboring properties and a surprising number of townspeople, including Howard Jenkins and several members of the town council. Clara had risen before first light, leaving Bethany in Mrs. Abernathy's care at the ranch house, and ridden into town to spread word of the peaceful protest. The response had exceeded her expectations, with many shopkeepers closing their businesses for the morning to join the gathering. Shortly after 8 o'clock, a group of men approached from the direction of town. Mr. Harrington of the railroad company, flanked by Sheriff Wilkes and 4 surveyors carrying equipment. Behind them came a wagon with supplies and several armed men who were clearly hired guns rather than railroad employees. The crowd parted silently to allow Rowan and Chief Black Horse to step forward. The 2 men stood side by side, unarmed but resolute. What is the meaning of this? Harrington demanded, his usual smooth manner cracking with irritation. We're here to protect what's ours, Rowan replied calmly. My land, the Apache burial grounds. We're not leaving. Harrington pulled a document from his coat pocket. I have a court order authorizing survey work to begin immediately. Anyone interfering will be arrested. Sheriff Wilkes patted his pistol meaningfully, though he looked uncomfortable facing so many of Painted Rock's citizens. Howard Jenkins stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. As an officer of the territorial court, I must inform you that your order is being challenged at the governor's office. No irreversible action should be taken until that appeal is heard. The law is on our side, Harrington insisted. Perhaps, Jenkins conceded, but public opinion is not, and I see the editor of the Territorial Gazette has joined us this morning. He nodded toward a thin man with a notebook who was observing the confrontation with keen interest. Harrington's face flushed with anger. This is obstruction of progress. Sheriff, do your duty. Wilkes shifted uneasily. Now, see here, Harrington. I can't arrest half the town and a group of peaceful Indians just for sitting on land. They're trespassing. Actually, Rowan interjected. They're my guests. On my property. Which, according to your own documentation, remains mine until purchase is completed. Clara, who had been standing nearby, moved to Rowan's side. Mr. Harrington, no one here wants violence. We're simply asking for the territorial governor to review the case before irreversible decisions are made. Harrington glared at her. You, the schoolteacher. I should have known you'd be behind this nonsense. Miss Kingston is a respected member of this community, Jenkins said sharply. I suggest you moderate your tone, sir. For a tense moment, it seemed Harrington might order his men forward regardless. Then, from the back of the crowd, a rider approached at a gallop. Everyone turned to see a man in an official uniform reining in his horse. Telegram for Howard Jenkins, Esquire, the rider announced, holding out an envelope. Jenkins stepped forward to take it, breaking the seal and reading quickly. A smile spread across his face. Gentlemen, he announced, I have here a directive from the territorial governor's office. All survey work is to cease immediately pending a full review of the proposed railroad route. The governor himself will be visiting next week to inspect the alternative path suggested by Mr. Nash and the Apache leadership. A cheer went up from the crowd. Harrington snatched the telegram, reading it with disbelief. This is outrageous. We have contracts, schedules, and we have justice on our side, Rowan said quietly. Sometimes that's enough. The railroad man crumpled the telegram in his fist. This isn't over, Nash. Not by a long shot. As Harrington and his men retreated toward town, the gathered protesters began to celebrate. Apache families embraced ranchers, townspeople shook hands with ranch hands, and children danced in impromptu circles. Clara found herself swept into Rowan's arms in a moment of jubilation. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her once before setting her down, his face alight with relief and joy. We did it, he said, his hands still on her waist. For now, at least, Clara cautioned, though she couldn't help returning his smile. It's a start, Rowan agreed, and it happened because of you. Your idea of peaceful resistance, your way with words that convinced so many to join us. Clara shook her head. It was all of us together. Your respect for the Apache, Jenkins' legal knowledge, the community's willingness to stand up for what's right. Rowan's eyes held hers, his expression growing serious despite the celebration around them. Clara, whatever he had been about to say was interrupted as Howard Jenkins approached, followed by Chief Black Horse and several others wanting to discuss next steps. The moment between them passed, but Clara carried the memory of Rowan's hands on her waist, the intensity in his eyes, throughout the long day of planning that followed. The Harvest Festival transformed Painted Rock's Main Street into a celebration of autumn bounty. Lanterns hung from every building, tables groaned with food prepared by the town's women, and a band of local musicians played lively tunes for dancing. Clara stood before the small mirror in her room at the ranch, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Abernathy had helped arrange her hair, pinning the dark curls atop her head with a few tendrils left to frame her face. You look beautiful, dear, the housekeeper said, bouncing Bethany on her hip. Rowan won't know what hit him. Clara blushed. Mrs. Abernathy, it's just a festival. The older woman smiled knowingly. I've known that boy for 15 years. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Before Clara could respond, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Abernathy opened it to reveal Rowan, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best black hat. He stopped short at the sight of Clara, his eyes widening slightly. "You look lovely," he said, the simple word carrying weight in his deep voice. "Thank you," Clara replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up quite well yourself." Rowan offered his arm. "Shall we?" The ride to town was filled with an anticipatory tension that made Clara's skin tingle. Since the standoff with the railroad 2 weeks prior, something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months, though neither had put them into words. The governor's visit had gone well, with the official agreeing to review the alternative route proposal seriously. The railroad company had reluctantly put their survey work on hold, and for now, an uneasy peace prevailed. As they approached the festivities, Clara could hear music and laughter drifting through the evening air. Rowan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The townspeople greeted them warmly. Clara had become a beloved figure in Painted Rock, respected for her teaching and admired for her role in the railroad dispute. Many parents stopped to thank her for their children's progress, while others simply welcomed her with genuine affection. What surprised her was how many people also approached Rowan with newfound respect. The rancher had always kept to himself, coming to town only when necessary, but his stand against the railroad had earned him the community's admiration. "Never thought I'd see the day when Rowan Nash would be the toast of the Harvest Festival," Sheriff Wilkes commented as he passed them, his tone somewhere between grudging respect and lingering resentment. "Times change, Wilkes," Rowan replied evenly, "even for those of us who prefer the old ways." As the evening progressed, Clara found herself swept into the celebration. She danced with several of her students' fathers, sampled Mrs. Wilson's famous apple pie, and laughed at the antics of the children running between the tables with streamers. Through it all, she was aware of Rowan's gaze following her, a steady presence in the swirl of activity. When the band struck up a waltz, he appeared at her side, offering his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally. Clara placed her hand in his. "I'd be honored." Rowan led her into the center of the street where couples were already circling to the music. His hand at her waist was warm and sure as he guided her through the steps with surprising grace. "I didn't know you could dance," Clara said, looking up at him. A smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted I learn. Said no son of hers would stomp around like a buffalo at social gatherings." Clara laughed. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Rowan said softly. "She would have liked you very much." The simple statement warmed Clara's heart. As they turned with the music, the lantern light casting a golden glow around them, she felt as though they were in a world of their own despite the crowded street. "Clara," Rowan said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you." Her heart quickened. "Yes." Before he could continue, a commotion near the edge of the festival drew everyone's attention. A group of riders had arrived, railroad men, by the look of their city clothes, with Harrington at their head. The music faltered and stopped as the newcomers dismounted. Harrington approached the gathering, his expression smug as he spotted Rowan and Clara. "Don't stop the celebration on our account," he called. "We've come with good news." Howard Jenkins stepped forward. "What brings you back to Painted Rock, Mr. Harrington?" "I understood the governor's review was still ongoing." "It is," Harrington agreed, "but my superiors have authorized me to make a new offer to Mr. Nash and the Apache." He glanced around. "Is Chief Black Horse present?" "Here." The chief emerged from the crowd, his dignity unmarred by the festival atmosphere. He had come with several of his people to participate in the trading that traditionally accompanied the harvest celebration. Harrington withdrew an envelope from his coat. The Western Pacific Railroad Company is prepared to triple its original offer for the disputed lands. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even Rowan looked momentarily taken aback by the figure. Additionally, Harrington continued, clearly enjoying the attention, we are willing to establish a trust for the Apache Band, providing annual payments for 20 years in exchange for rights to cross their burial grounds, which we will treat with all due respect, of course. Chief Black Horse's expression remained impassive. Money cannot buy sacred land. Everyone has a price, Chief, Harrington said dismissively. This is a generous offer, far more than you'll get if we wait for the courts to settle the matter. Rowan's jaw tightened. The governor seemed inclined to support our alternative route. Politicians say many things, Harrington replied with a knowing smile. But when it comes to progress versus sentiment, progress typically wins. My offer stands until noon tomorrow. After that, we return to legal channels. With a tip of his hat, he and his men remounted and rode away, leaving a buzz of conversation in their wake. Clara felt Rowan's hand tighten around hers, only then realizing he had been holding it throughout the exchange. What will you do? She asked quietly. His eyes met hers, troubled but resolute. I need to speak with Black Horse. The offer is substantial. You're considering it? Clara couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. I need to consider everything, Rowan said carefully. For the ranch. For the future. Something in his tone made Clara's heart sink. The magical evening had been shattered, the moment between them lost. As Rowan went to confer with Chief Black Horse and Jenkins, Clara found herself standing alone in the middle of the street, the celebration continuing around her but no longer including her. Mrs. Wilson approached, offering a cup of cider. Everything all right, dear? You look pale. Clara forced a smile. Just tired, I think. It's been a long week of teaching. But as she sipped the cider, watching Rowan in deep discussion with the other men, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change and not necessarily for the better. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the festive mood of earlier replaced by a thoughtful silence. Clara waited for Rowan to speak, to share what had been decided in his conversation with Black Horse and Jenkins, but he seemed lost in his own thoughts. Finally, as they approached the ranch house, Clara could bear it no longer. Are you going to accept the railroad's offer? Rowan guided the wagon to a stop before answering. I don't know yet. It's a lot of money, Clara acknowledged. It is. Rowan stared at the dark outline of the house. Enough to expand the ranch in other directions. Buy better breeding stock. Build a bigger house. Something in his tone made Clara look at him sharply. Is that what you want? A bigger house. Rowan turned to her then, his face half illuminated by the moonlight. What I want is security. For the ranch. For the future. He stopped abruptly. For what? Clara pressed. Rowan sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. For the life I hope to build. The family I hope to have someday. The words hung in the night air between them. Clara's heart beat faster as she realized what he might be saying. And what did Chief Black Horse say? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He refuses to sell sacred ground, regardless of the price, Rowan replied. Says some things are beyond value. Do you agree with him? Rowan was silent for a long moment. My father would have. He believed this land was a trust, not a commodity. And you? I want to, Rowan admitted. But I also want. He trailed off, looking at Clara with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. What do you want, Rowan? She asked softly. Instead of answering, he reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. What I started to tell you at the dance before we were interrupted. I've been wanting to say it for weeks now. Clara held her breath, hardly daring to hope. I love you, Clara Kingston, Rowan said simply. Have since the day you stood up to the town council with your head held high, even though you were still weak from hunger. Maybe even since I first saw you in the street, protecting your sister against all odds. Joy bloomed in Clara's chest, expanding until she thought it might burst forth like light. I love you too, she whispered. So much. Rowan's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening as Clara's arms went around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I want to build a life with you, Clara. You and Bethany. That's why the railroad offer matters. It could give us a start that would take years to build otherwise. Clara pulled back slightly to see his face. Money isn't what makes a home, Rowan. We already have one here. You'd be happy here? As it is? There was vulnerability in his question that touched Clara deeply. I already am happy here, she assured him. Happier than I've ever been. Rowan kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. Then I'll tell Harrington his money can't buy what matters most. They walked hand in hand to the house, where Mrs. Abernathy was waiting up for them. One look at their linked hands and glowing faces told the housekeeper all she needed to know. Well, it's about time, she said, trying to sound stern but failing to hide her smile. That baby's been asleep for hours, and I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm sorry we're late, Clara began, but Mrs. Abernathy waved her apology away. Never mind that. Just glad to see you two finally came to your senses. She headed toward her room, calling over her shoulder. Don't stay up too late now. Respectable folks still need their sleep, even when they're in love. Alone in the front room, Clara and Rowan couldn't help but laugh softly at the housekeeper's forthright manner. She's been dropping hints for months, Rowan admitted, still holding Clara's hand. So has half the town, apparently, Clara replied. Mrs. Wilson told me tonight that she'd been praying for us to see the light since July. Rowan drew her close, his arms encircling her waist. I think I've known since the day you stood up to Harrington at the schoolhouse. No one's ever defended me like that before. And I knew when you carved that cradle for Bethany, Clara countered, her hands resting on his chest. The care you took, the love you put into it, it showed me the kind of man you are. They stood together in the quiet house, the only sound the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional pop from the banked fire. Tomorrow would bring decisions about the railroad, discussions about their future, practical considerations of all kinds. But tonight was for this newfound understanding, this precious acknowledgement of feelings too long unspoken. I should let you get some rest, Rowan said reluctantly. Clara nodded, though she was loath to end the evening. Tomorrow will be a busy day. Rowan brushed a stray curl from her face. Whatever happens with the railroad, with the ranch, know that you and Bethany are what matter most to me. And you to us, Clara replied softly. With one last kiss, gentler than before but filled with promise, they parted for the night. The next morning, Rowan rode into town alone to meet with Harrington, despite Clara's protests that she should accompany him. Better I face him myself, Rowan had insisted. He's not a man who takes rejection well. Clara spent the morning anxiously helping Mrs. Abernathy with household chores, playing with Bethany, and repeatedly checking the road for signs of Rowan's return. By noon, her nerves were stretched thin. He'll be fine, Mrs. Abernathy assured her, handing Bethany a wooden spoon to play with. That boy can handle himself. I know, Clara sighed. I just wish the sound of approaching horses interrupted her. Rushing to the window, she saw not just Rowan returning, but a whole party of riders: Howard Jenkins, Chief Black Horse, and several men she didn't recognize in formal attire. Mrs. Abernathy, who are those men with Rowan? Clara asked, hastily smoothing her skirts and checking that her hair was in place. The housekeeper peered out. Land's sakes, that's Judge Peterson from the territorial court. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the governor himself. Clara barely had time to collect herself before Rowan was at the door, his face alight with excitement. "Clara," he said, taking her hands. "You won't believe what's happened." The group of men filed into the ranch house, doffing hats and introducing themselves. Indeed, among them was Territorial Governor John Fremont, a distinguished man with shrewd eyes and a diplomatic manner. "Miss Kingston," the governor said, bowing slightly, "I've heard much about you. Your advocacy for the alternative railroad route was most persuasive." "Thank you, sir," Clara replied, flustered by the unexpected visitor. "But I only supported what Rowan and Chief Black Horse proposed." "Modesty becomes you," the governor said with a smile, "but I recognize effective argumentation when I see it. Your letter to the Territorial Gazette was quite moving." Clara glanced at Rowan in confusion. She had written no such letter. "I might have sent your draft notes to the editor," Rowan admitted sheepishly. "The ones you wrote to help me organize my thoughts. They were more eloquent than anything I could have composed." Before Clara could respond, Howard Jenkins cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should explain to Miss Kingston why we've descended upon her home en masse." "Of course," the governor agreed. "Miss Kingston, after reviewing the situation thoroughly, I've decided to support the alternative railroad route, the one that bypasses both Mr. Nash's eastern pasture and the Apache burial grounds." Clara gasped with delight. "That's wonderful news." "Indeed," the governor continued. "Furthermore, I've convinced the railroad company that their interests are better served by community cooperation than legal battles. They've withdrawn their offer to purchase Mr. Nash's land and have agreed to negotiate fair compensation for the use of the alternative route." "I don't understand," Clara said, looking from the governor to Rowan. "What changed their minds?" Judge Peterson spoke up. "Economics, my dear." The governor pointed out that a railroad facing hostility from local ranchers, townspeople, and Indian tribes would face endless delays and difficulties. Better to pay a bit more now for goodwill than battle resistance for years. "And," Howard Jenkins added with a satisfied smile, "I might have mentioned that as the territory's leading newspaper editor's brother-in-law, I could ensure the story received national attention either as a triumph of cooperation or as an example of corporate bullying." Rowan moved to Clara's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "It's over. We've won." The news was almost too good to believe. "And Harrington?" "The railroad company. Harrington has been reassigned," the governor said diplomatically. "The company is sending a new representative to finalize the details. Someone with a more collaborative approach." Chief Black Horse, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "The spirits of our ancestors will rest easy now, and the Nash Ranch will continue to prosper beside our lands, as it has for many seasons." The meeting continued for another hour, with details discussed and agreements outlined. Mrs. Abernathy served coffee and her famous apple cake, while Bethany charmed the governor by toddling over to pat his polished boots. When the distinguished guests finally departed, Clara and Rowan stood on the porch, watching them ride away. "I still can't believe it," Clara said, leaning against Rowan's shoulder. "Everything we hoped for." Rowan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Not quite everything." Clara looked up questioningly. "There's still one hope I haven't seen fulfilled," Rowan said, his voice growing serious. "The most important one." Before Clara could ask what he meant, Rowan was kneeling before her, still holding her hands. "Clara Kingston, I've loved you since the moment you showed me what true courage looks like. You've transformed my life, my home, and my heart." His voice wavered slightly. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" of making this ranch a true home for us, for Bethany, and for the family we might build together. Tears of joy filled Clara's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Oh, Rowan, yes. He rose to his feet, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her off the ground. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, sealed with all the love that had grown between them over the months since a desperate young woman had begged for milk in a dusty street, and a lonely rancher had put her on his horse and taken her home. The wedding took place on Christmas Day, 1878, in Painted Rock's small church. Snow had fallen the night before, a rare occurrence in that part of Arizona Territory, covering the landscape in a pristine white blanket that glittered in the winter sunshine. Clara wore a gown of ivory satin that Mrs. Abernathy and the town's seamstress had labored over for weeks, adorned with lace that Howard Jenkins had ordered specially from San Francisco. Bethany, now crawling and attempting first steps, served as flower girl, carried down the aisle by Mrs. Wilson's oldest daughter. The church was filled to capacity with townspeople, neighboring ranchers, and a contingent from the Apache Reservation, including Chief Black Horse and his family. Even Sheriff Wilkes attended, his usual gruffness softened by the holiday spirit and the community's newfound unity. Rowan, standing at the altar in a new black suit, watched with wonder as Clara walked toward him on Howard Jenkins' arm. The lawyer had offered to give her away, in the absence of her father, an honor that had brought tears to Clara's eyes when he proposed it. "You look beautiful," Rowan whispered as she reached him. "And you look very handsome," she replied softly, her heart so full of joy she thought it might overflow. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other through whatever challenges life might bring, to cherish their love through good times and bad, to build a family founded on respect and tenderness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rowan kissed Clara with such gentle passion that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. Bethany, not to be left out, reached for them from Mrs. Wilson's daughter's arms, causing laughter to ripple through the church as Rowan swept the baby up to include her in their embrace. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. There was dancing, a feast prepared by the women of Painted Rock, and enough goodwill to warm even the coldest heart. As the evening progressed, Clara found a moment alone with her new husband near the punch bowl. "Happy?" Rowan asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever imagined possible," Clara replied truthfully. "A year ago, I was alone and afraid, with no hope for the future. Now I have you. Bethany has a father who adores her, and we have a whole community around us." Rowan kissed her temple. "And this is just the beginning." 5 years later, Christmas, 1883, the Nash Ranch had grown considerably in 5 years. The main house had been expanded to include a proper nursery, a larger kitchen, and a study where Clara still prepared her lessons, though she now taught only 3 days a week, sharing duties with a younger teacher newly arrived from the east. The railroad had been completed 2 years prior, following the alternative route as promised. Its presence had brought increased prosperity to Painted Rock, now a growing town with a proper hotel, a bank, and even a small hospital where Dr. Wilson, Tommy's older brother, practiced after returning from medical school in Philadelphia. On this Christmas morning, Clara stood on the porch, watching the sunrise with a cup of steaming coffee in her hands. Behind her, the house was still quiet, though she knew it wouldn't remain so for long. Not with a 5-year-old Bethany and their 3-year-old son, Robert, eager to discover what gifts awaited them beneath the tree Rowan had cut from the western hills. And there was a third child, now too tiny, Elizabeth, just 2 months old, sleeping in the cradle beside their bed, another blessing in a life that seemed full to overflowing with them. The sound of boots on the wooden steps made Clara turn. Rowan approached, returning from his brief morning check of the livestock, his breath visible in the cold air. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Nash," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pulling her against his chest. "Merry Christmas, husband," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "Everything all right with the animals?" "All quiet. Miguel's keeping watch so we can enjoy the day with the children." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about, standing out here alone?" Clara smiled, covering his hands with her own. "About the day we met, about how far we've come." Rowan's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made, putting you on that horse. Even when the sheriff laughed? Especially then." Rowan turned her in his arms to face him. "I saw something in your eyes that day, a strength, a determination. I knew you were someone special." Clara traced the lines of his face with her fingertips. 5 years had added a few more creases around his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. "I saw something in you too," she said softly. "Kindness when I needed it most. A good heart beneath that quiet exterior." From inside the house came the sound of running feet and excited voices. Bethany and Robert were awake. "We should go in," Clara said, though she was reluctant to leave the peaceful moment. Rowan kissed her, a tender touch that still had the power to make her heart race after 5 years of marriage. "I love you, Clara Nash, every day more than the last." "And I love you," she replied, "for saving us that day, and for every day since." Hand in hand, they went inside to their children, to the warmth of their home, to the life they had built together from a chance encounter on a desperate day. Outside, the sun rose fully over the Arizona landscape, bathing the Nash Ranch in golden light, a promise of another day, another year, in a life blessed beyond measure. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy putting a desperate girl on his horse and taking her home. The end.